When a man shows emotion in leadership, he's evolved and even kind. If a woman cries or gets upset, she's unstable, volatile, emotional. If you're a female boss, you are one of a few, and yours is not an easy job. Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Bongani Bingwa. In assessing 25 years of democracy, tonight we focus on whether we are closer to achieving gender parity in the workplace. Half of all graduates who leave tertiary are women, yet only 10% of South African CEOs are women, 22% on the boards of directors, and only 31% of South African companies, in fact, have no female representation in senior leadership roles. Now, the country's constitution and the Employment Equity Act are designed to promote women's participation in the private and public sectors. In fact, the JSE requires boards to publish their gender diversity strategy. So, on our poll then tonight, we're asking, can we ever achieve gender parity in South Africa? You can choose from our standard three colors. Green is for yes, yellow is for maybe, and of course red is for no. You can also interact with our poll on Facebook and Twitter, remembering to use the hashtags SABCDG25 or hashtag SABC News. And of course, we want you to send us your WhatsApp videos to 065 862 4548. Now, the Commission for Gender Equality is concerned about the pace of transformation in the workplace. More than 20 years after policies and legislation were put in place to ensure gender parity, women remain marginalized across many sectors. Our producer, Lindiwe Mabena, takes a look at what's stalling gender parity in the workplace.
Gender equality is enshrined in the Bill of Rights of our country's constitution and forms an integral part of our lives in a democracy. When announcing his new cabinet after the elections in May, President Cyril Ramaphosa appointed, for the first time in the history of the country, a gender-balanced national executive.
It's been a long journey towards women's emancipation in South Africa. And while gains have been made, more still needs to be done.
Women are not as many as we would have liked occupying high decision-making structures. We see that more women are actually occupying either the middle or the lower strata of the management in those government departments, as well as private sectors, as well as SOEs.
The Commission has found that private companies and even mining conglomerates are resistant to change. Matebula adds that women with disabilities and the LGBTIQ community are the most marginalized.
And it's even worse when it comes to promotion. You will find that gays and lesbians are not, even considered for promotions, for an example, even if a person puts more work or puts more effort.
Another contested issue is equal pay. According to the International Labour Organization's Global Wage Report for 2018 and 2019, women earn about 20% less than their male counterparts.
When the payment is structured, they look at all of those things to say you are still young, you are in your reproductive age, and you will actually be giving us more time off than a normal male.
Patriarchy, lack of information, and concrete plans to mainstream gender equality are said to be factors that contribute to this social injustice.
That is why we always move in to do something we call gender sensitization workshops, so that we sensitize the senior management, the CEOs, the CFOs of today, to say that for you to be able to change the culture, it must start with you first.
The Gender Commission chairperson believes this issue needs an all-hands-on-deck approach.
Boy and girl child must be empowered equally. They must know that both of them, they have rights, both of them, they must occupy, or they must run chores equally. So sensitization in schools is important. Sensitization in universities, for an example, is equally important.
While it's clear that work needs to be done to even the gender playing field, Mathebula does acknowledge various NGOs who have been steadfast in their attempt to change the narrative. Lindiwe Mabena for SABC News in Johannesburg.
That report there from our Lindiwe Mabena. Now joining the conversation is Terry Oakley-Smith, founder of Diversity and a pioneer in South African diversity and change arena. Terry, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Democracy Gauge.
Pleasure.
Now, on paper, you would think that the last 25 years would have meant that we would have come very far in terms of addressing gender parity issues, particularly in the workplace. Have we?
No, as you said in your introduction, I think we're falling extremely short. I mean, if you look at the top 40 companies on the JSE, when Maria Ramos resigned, there was not one CEO who was a woman. And now there's one person who's been appointed. As you said, only a fifth of directors are women. Many of the organizations have no women at all on their boards. And there's also this golden skirt phenomenon, whereby they keep appointing the same women to sit on numerous boards. So they're not broadening the pool and bringing in fresh ideas and fresh talent.
But could one be encouraged, for example, if we look at the political scene? We've got a number of premiers now who are women. We've got, of course, I think half of cabinet is comprised of women. Are those encouraging signs?
Well, I suppose from a political point of view, and of course it depends on, I think women are always under the spotlight, Bongani. A woman premier, a woman minister will be looked at and sort of assessed far more than her male counterpart. Because, you know, after all, it's a man's world. I mean, if you said right in the beginning, and you're so right, but if you think about the world we live in, big data, algorithms, they're all predicated on men.
And how men think.
Yes, and men altogether. If you look at the shelves in your kitchen, the height of them is assumed to be your height, not my height. If you think of the seatbelt in your car, the way the car's designed, it's for a man. Even breast pumps, which I'm sure you're never going to need, Bongani, have been designed and thought of by men. So, I mean, that's the starting point, is that it is a man's world. And then if you look in business, you can see that it's not only at the top layers that women are so underrepresented, but it's also from middle management. Right. And as you said, I mean, I think it's more than half the graduates leaving our universities are women, but they're not reflected in the workplace.
So what goes wrong? Because, you know, one could easily assume that a lot of younger women who are now entering the workplace are as educated as the men, if not more, from the stats you are quoting. Where does it go wrong in terms of the progression to senior roles?
I think women were always as well educated as men, and sometimes even better educated than men. But what it comes down to is the culture of the organization, the extent to which the organization is welcoming and actually allows women to progress in the way that they're capable of progressing. You know, the culture in organizations is often antithetical to the progress of women. You know, the language that's used, the general environment, the networking, the social things that happen, the sporting things that happen, are all directed towards men.
And even something like salaries, right? We don't always necessarily get the same remuneration for the same work.
We hardly ever do, Bongani. The gender pay gap in South Africa is 25%. And that's from the starting level right up to the most senior level. And bonuses too are in favor of men. A man will get a bigger bonus for the same performance as a woman.
It would be easy to make this conversation about the decisions that bosses make or boards make. But what about society then in general? What attitudes are still prevailing that fuel the kind of imbalance we're discussing?
Well, I think it's societal attitudes really across the board. I mean, I think the notion that women would even be in the workplace is a relatively recent phenomenon. And, you know, for many men who are those big bosses, their wives or their partners, you know, are seen to be at home taking the children to school. They're not thought of. Women are not conceived of as partners in the workplace, women able to do the same job as the man, maybe differently, maybe even more creatively. And the other big problem, I think, is that although many men, you know, espouse, and bosses espouse gender parity and even are working towards it, they haven't got it as a business imperative. They think it would be a nice to have, and we must have a mixture, we must have diversity, but they don't see that having women in the workplace is going to add value and profitability to the business itself. It's a business issue.
They don't see it as an advantage. We're going to continue our conversation, Terry. But are you a woman in the workplace? Are you taken seriously, or are your decisions constantly questioned because you're a woman? After the break, we'll gauge your views on whether South Africa can achieve gender parity, particularly in the workplace. Stay with us. Baletsile Mthethwa joins us now live. MNS attorneys were mandated to conduct these reports and investigations. What sort of processes did they follow?
We heard Tiamo explaining that they worked with actuarial scientists in order to investigate these transactions.
Slap suits, tell us more about this.
The concept of slap suits, which is litigation often used by big companies to silence critics.
We as civil society won't stand for this kind of intimidation and harassment. If you come to South Africa, you need to obey the obligations that you have in terms of the laws of this country, including environmental laws.
Every high-profile court case, every breaking news story.
The manner in which these audits are done. Why is it targeted to blacks and Indians?
Every inquiry. We are there, front and center. We also bring you an hour-long breakdown of the day's markets, simplifying the numbers for your better understanding.
When everyone is too excited about the market, that's normally when things start turning.
All this and more. This is On Point.
Welcome back. It's all about you here on the Democracy Gauge. Now, the People's View allows you to interact with us and to share your views. So let's find out what you've had to say via your WhatsApp videos.
Hello, I'm Annelie Weber. Gender parity can definitely be achieved if all legislation includes equality and the implementation thereof. Education is the key word. We from young boys and girls are taught equality and respect. Young female learners should have access to proper toilets and cleaning facilities as well as free sanitary pads. They should remain in school and receive equal education with their male counterparts. Gender parity can be achieved if the whole society takes hands and work towards this goal.
Now, research shows that the answer to why so few women reach senior leadership positions in South Africa is a complicated one. There have been surveys done, more than 1,000 women and men on JSE listed and private organizations, and it indicates that South African women are much less likely than their male counterparts to recommend their organization as a place of work. And that tells you, I suppose, everything you need to know. We're continuing then our conversation with Terry Oakley-Smith. Terry, again, you know, it's not just about progression, exactly as the research that I've just referred to there shows. If you wouldn't want another woman to work there, it surely means you're not entirely happy to be there yourself.
No, absolutely. And I think that's very powerful research, that women rarely want to recommend their places of work to other women or even to men. And I think that highlights what I was saying earlier, that organizational culture plays such an important role in determining the progression of women in organizations.
So what do we do? The legislation is there. As you said, people will say this is what they want to do, but they don't actually do it. What do we do?
I think there's a number of things that we can do. First of all, organizations need to become a lot more flexible, and that would actually benefit all millennials, whether women or men, and women in organizations. One of the other reasons, as I said before, women often find the environment negative, and the sexual harassment is mentioned in so much of the research that you've been citing, Bongani. There's no sexual harassment policy, people don't know what it is, and women don't always feel safe or feel comfortable in the workplace, and that's where a fundamental thing that one can get right. Then mentors. Coaches, and that needs to start not when women are approaching the top of the organization, but around about middle management is when women can most benefit from coaching, and that coaches can be men or can be other women, but that's where they're going to find most benefit.
We're talking, of course, about women who are employed. The stats will also tell us that the majority of the people who are unemployed tend to be women, and the people who are most likely to remain unemployed tend to be women. What can be done there?
I know. I think it's 46.7% of the unemployed are African women. So intersectionality also plays a huge role. I mean, a person is not just a woman, but she's also black. She may also be a person living with a disability. And I think that there needs to be far more effort made at school level to encourage girl children into the kind of careers of the future, the sort of fourth industrial revolution type of careers, which are to do with technology, ICT, and so on. Trying to move away from the assumptions that those are male careers, because actually women really excel in any areas of creativity and innovation. And so we should be encouraging our girl children to do coding, to do ICT things, because that's going to be a very good place.
Part of why we find ourselves here are still the entrenchment, I suppose, of traditional values around child rearing and what roles should be played in the home and by whom. What's your comment on that?
Well, I think you've said it all, Bongani. I mean, most of South Africans, women are the ones that do the child rearing. Even in sort of couples which would be seen as woke, you still find that men do about 30% of the helping around the house, women about 70%. So that's an additional load on the woman in the workplace, who's already paid less in the workplace, who already finds the workplace less comfortable, and still has to go home and do the majority of childcare and cleaning and cooking and...
And let's say that an organization does allow for the progression of a woman, the leadership style easily gets questioned, as I said in my introduction a little earlier on. You know, if a man is aggressive, he's seen as bold and decisive. If a woman is displaying the same traits, the B word gets used, all kinds of negative pejoratives are used against her.
But I think being a good leader is really not about expressing oneself loudly or in a bullying way, which is the way that we've tended to do it in South Africa.
Because that's how men do it.
Because exactly, that's how men do it. But I think to be inspirational as a leader is extremely important. I remember hearing a story from a mine where a woman took over from a man, and there was a fatality on the mine, and the woman leader brought all of the workforce out in mourning together, and it made such an incredible impression that suddenly people realize our leader is human. Our leader is not just that person who tells me to move my effing whatever and to do whatever, but is somebody who's a human being like me. And we need to humanize the workplace for men and for women, for all of us.
And that speaks to motivation and why people will do what they do, not just sort of a results-oriented workplace, but really the idea that people will feel they belong and that there's compassion for them when the tough times come.
Absolutely, that they're seen as a human being who has a life, who has concerns. I mean, if you think of the amount of people living with mental illness in South Africa, and especially when you think of things like unemployment and the job losses that are pending and happening, the amount of stress people are under, it calls for a more humane way of managing. We don't get the best out of people when we shout at them and bully them. We get the best out of people when we appreciate them, recognize them, and give them an opportunity to show what they're able to do.
Talk to me, though, about women who have achieved and who have done well, but who are still seen as proxies of male figures behind the scenes, pulling the strings.
You know, that happens very often, and also it happens equally often to black leaders who are also seen as, oh, he's just there, and meanwhile the whites at the next level are running the show. The intersectionality again. I think that it's a very awkward situation, and I think it's a situation where the person involved needs to actually stand up and move away from that, because it's very difficult.
How do you?
Well, I think, you know, it's something that needs to be brought up at board level. It's something that needs to be brought up at ManCo level. And women need to begin to recognize, and I'm sure many women watching this do recognize, that they are equally as capable as a man to do the job the man is doing.
So for young girls who may be watching this discussion, who are obviously growing up in the world such as we've described it, what's the message? How do we think differently as a society? How do we get them to see different possibilities?
I think it starts in the home, and where we encourage society to realize that both women and men are capable of working. I think it also demands in our schools, and there's a lot of work to be done in our schools, Bongani, helping girls to look at a plethora of career options and not to just stay with the same ones that they've been used to, teaching, nursing, whatever, but that they see that engineering, we have more engineering graduates who are women these days than men. So there are all sorts of opportunities, but we need to make young women aware of these opportunities. And then we need to make our workplaces fit the women. So if you're going to be a miner and you have to wear protective gear, let's make sure it fits a woman's body. If we're going to be an engineer and we need to do engineering work, let's make sure that the tools we use are suitable for women's hands. It's about changing our world attitude in many ways.
And of course, research tells us that when women are empowered, societies, nations are empowered. We'll have to leave it there. Terry Oakley-Smith from Diversity. After the break, we'll continue to bring you a profile, as we always do here on the Democracy Gauge. If you are 84-year-old Sarah, who's been interviewed, Sarah Mahlangu from Mpumalanga, stay tuned.
The SABC News mobile app is your one-stop digital portal to all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest in breaking news. Watch the SABC News channel along with clips and live streams of all the big news events. And listen to all the SABC News radio stations live, including podcasts and much more. Simply download the SABC News app to your Android or iOS device from either the Play Store or the App Store. SABC News, independent, impartial.
We're very keen to hear why must Zuma's character be assassinated.
Mzwandile, former President Jacob Zuma, doesn't believe that there was state capture.
He did qualify to say his understanding may be limited.
Arabile, there's lots of red on the board behind you. Is it a true reflection of what's happening on the markets today?
Yeah, it certainly is, Nzing. About 0.1% lower thus far for the markets here locally.
Your money on Market Sense.
South Africa needs jobs.
Well, through the Democracy Gauge, SABC News profiles a different South African and their assessment of 25 years of democracy. Among the millions who've voted for the first time in 1994 was Sarah Mahlangu. She was incredibly excited to exercise her right. The 84-year-old from Vezubuhle in Mpumalanga hasn't been able to walk in the last 4 years, and this disability makes it difficult as she takes care of her grandchildren.
Sarah Mahlangu, Sarah Mahlangu, ngiyahola ngiphela amanzi maningi akhona mhlana ngekho awakho mara awona ahlala khona nasipompi msangithi amanzi wona ahlala khona nasakhambile kodwa mara zakubuya nesikontinu sibasifakile ngithi sekuthi ke mina kangisakhambi ngimbono ngasakhona ukuhamba nokusikimuka ngikhoni ngesaba ukuthi ngizakuwa nangisikimela ngiyesaba ukuthi ngizakuba kahle ngihlele phasa pha kodwa mara angalapha kubuhlungu khona So nathi into esengibhalile ukuhamba amadolo la ngesaba ukuthi ngizakuwa. Ngesaba ukuthi ngathi nangisikimela duleke phasi kusukuthi kodwa akusimnandi ni. 94 ngiyakhumbula mara ngisazi ukuthi kwenzekani. Ngiyakhumbula mara ukuthi wavondelwa kokuthoma bana aphume. Bajo bajabule sterek. Bajabule sterek. Nakho kuvota kokuthoma. Angithi bese simbona emaphephini ukuthi angumandela mara. Sambona ke very good ke. Mara zange simbone ngenyama kuye pliye. Sambona sasa sinande simbone emaphephini. Unyaka lo iye ngivotile iye. Sekuphela nakho. Yaphela nakho iye. Ngivotile unyaka lo iye. Ngabona ikolo seyijamile ngihlezi ngapha ngemva. Ngikhasa ngibuya ngetoilet iye. Ongifela ikolo isakhona sakuvota iye. Sabe uyabuya ngibuyisa ikolo iye. Sifuna ukulele sokuphunguleke. Lele sobona phunguleke iye. Ethi ngazi buzakuphunguka kanjani. Buzakuphunguka kanjani mara mnte enhleke sikhana ukuthi bulele sokuphunguleke iye. Hawu siyahola sinamanzi. Nekontiri zikhona epateni apha iye.
So then before we say goodbye, let's take a look at the results for today's poll. There they are on your screen. The vast majority, 47%, saying no, 27% are maybes, and the yeses are 26%. That's it then from me, Bongani Bingwa, and the Democracy Gauge team. Until the next time, ubusuku benzolo. Good night. It's limited.